Welcome to the next edition of Powerful Words with Caleb. We are so appreciative of you visiting and reviewing the materials, and we thank you so much for your participation and your insight. We do here at this news channel really appreciate the input that comes from the people because you make us much greater than we are individually. And I hope and pray that the material that I bring forward today is illuminating and that it's helpful, and it also sponsors some additional research on your part or your friend's part that produce some materials that we have yet to see that give us a further understanding of our current predicament and where we're about to go. As the last several shows have not been recorded, I'm taking it upon myself now to go back over some of the materials that have been presented, as I believe that they are something that need to be put out there so that people might review them, look over them, and as I said, use them for additional research. So to that end, I want to start off with a subject on which I began last week, which is the development of the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. To that avenue, I want to present an article right off that deals with the Office of Director of National Intelligence and its inception. So let's go to that article here. Okay, as we can see, this article has now come up, and this is regarding the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. And I will get you a date here. It appears to be 2005, if I'm correct. Let's see if we can get a date up at the top. I do not see the date on here, but I do believe that it's 2005. I begin. The idea of a Director of National Intelligence dates to 1955, when a blue ribbon study commissioned by Congress recommended that the Director of Central Intelligence employ a deputy to run the CIA so that the director could focus on coordinating the overall intelligence effort. This notion emerged as a consistent theme in many subsequent studies of the intelligence community commissioned by both the legislative and executive branches over the next 5 decades. Now let us recall 1955. 1955 would have been just post the Korean War. The current standing in the intelligence agencies those were the years directly involved in MK Ultra. So the intelligence agencies were involved in studies in black ops and financial investigations. So let's go onward. Lessons from September 11th, 2001. Moved forward the long-standing call for a major intelligence reform and the creation of a Director of National Intelligence post 9/11 investigations included a joint congressional inquiry and the Independent National Commission on Terrorism Attacks upon the United States. Now let's remember, folks, this was proposed in 1955. It is now 2001. So it has been some 46 years after this having been recommended, and now it's to take place. Now, why would there be a 46-year gap in there? Well, let's go forward and start to draw some conclusions based upon the format that it appears that this currently follows in this nation. The 9/11 Commission's report on July 2004 proposed sweeping change in the intelligence community, including the creation of a national intelligence director. Very soon after the report was released, the federal government moved forward to undertake reform. President Bush signed 4 executive orders in August 2004 that strengthened and reformed the intelligence community as much as possible without legislation. In Congress, both the House and the Senate passed bills with major amendments to the National Security Act of 1947. Intense negotiations to reconcile the 2 bills ultimately led to the Intelligence Reform and Terrorism Prevention Act of 2004. Now let me go ahead and open that in another tab. Okay, IRTPA, which President Bush signed into law on December 17, 2004. Launch of the ODNI. In February 2005, the President nominated John D. Negroponte, ambassador to Iraq, as the first Director of National Intelligence, and U.S. Air Force Lieutenant General Michael V. Hayden as the first Principal Deputy DNI, promoting him to General on April 21st, 2005, in the Oval Office. Ambassador Negroponte and General Hayden were sworn in, and ODNI began operations at 7 a.m. on April 22nd, 2005. Previous directors, now these are previous directors after John Negroponte, include John M. Mike McConnell, Vice Admiral, U.S. Navy, retired; Dennis Blair; and James R. Clapper, Lieutenant General, U.S. Air Force, retired. Dan Coats is the current Director of National Intelligence. Okay, so that gives us the precursor to what we are going to look at today. And I'm not going to go over the swearing in of John Negroponte. I don't believe that that's necessarily relevant. What we should do, though, is look at Mr. Negroponte himself and look at his history, and I think you will see that it's dubious at best. John Negroponte, death squad supporter put in charge of U.S. spy agencies. Note, as of 2008, Negroponte is Deputy Secretary of State, merely the latest position of important service to the empire. So this reporter obviously has a specific bent, a specific bias towards the fact that Negroponte is a member of empire, and that Negroponte has now become Deputy Secretary of State within 3 years of being made ODNI. So what were the objectives achieved at ODNI? I'll leave that for you to see, but we can see that we now have one individual in charge of 17 or 18 different intelligence agencies. Okay, Department of the Air Force, Army, Navy, Central Intelligence Agency, National Security Agency, National Reconnaissance Office, Geospatial Intelligence, Marine Corps, Department of Justice, Department of Treasury, U.S. Department of Drug Enforcement, Department of State, U.S. Department of Homeland Security, Department of Energy, and Defense Intelligence Agencies, and Coast Guard, excuse me. So now we see that in our current circumstances, James Clapper, who appears to remain very solemn, very silent, very thoughtful in the matter, was in fact the boss of all of these intelligence agencies through our endeavors here in this political debacle that's been occurring in the last 4 to 5 years. So that's interesting stuff. Now, many of these people who testify in this document have knowledge of John Negroponte and his past, and they are. I will say that none of them have anything favorable to say about John Negroponte, except that he's the exact most wicked person that they could possibly put in the position to bring about an outcome that is absolutely torturesome and wicked. And I quote Diana Ortiz, "For those of us who work in the area of human rights, this is yet another sad day. The Bush administration seems determined to promote persons whose careers have been closely associated with torture. Could the administration not find one person for the job who has a demonstrated concern for defending human rights? Certainly, John Negroponte does not fit that bill. His nomination is appalling and is an insult to those who have survived torture. One more slap in the face of the current administration." Sister Letitia Boards, quote, "During his nomination of the UN ambassadorship, we carried a public information campaign detailing how Negroponte gave the CIA-backed Honduran death squads an open field when he was ambassador to Honduras. His hearings, however, were held a couple of days after 9/11 tragedy, so he was hurriedly confirmed as people did not want prolonged hearings in that environment. That's how he got confirmed the first time. Negroponte collaborated with human rights violators everywhere he has been. His record is public. Our Congress is letting us down again. Negroponte is once again being promoted instead of being held accountable. During Negroponte's tenure, U.S. military aid to Honduras grew from $4 million to $77.4 million. The U.S. launched a covert war against Nicaragua and mined its harbors, and the U.S. trained Honduran military to support the Contras. An Associated Press story states, quote, during 2001 confirmation hearings for his UN ambassadorship, an appointment that was delayed for 6 months because of the controversy over his tenure in Honduras, Negroponte testified that he did not believe death squads were operating in Honduras, end quote. Robert Perry of Secrecy Privilege at AOL, quote, the choice of John Negroponte to be the first U.S. intelligence czar following Elliott Abrams' promotion to be Deputy National Security Advisor marks the continued reemergence of the officials tied to the darkest moments of Central American violence in the 1980s. There's also irony in trusting Negroponte to oversee objective intelligence analysis, since he either was oblivious to the illicit behavior going on around him as U.S. ambassador to Honduras, or he was complicit in a wide range of human rights abuses. Peter Kornblue. Kornblue is a senior analyst with the National Security Archive in Washington, D.C. Quotes, the Iran-Contra scandal, a declassified history, end quotes, he said today, quotes, the document showed that Negroponte helped clear the way for a secret agreement under which the United States would provide more CIA money to Honduran army generals and additionally military economic aid to the country. In exchange, Honduras agreed to allow the Contras to continue operating on Honduran soil. Ray McGovern, a 27-year veteran of the CIA, he said today, quotes, Negroponte's record does not inspire confidence that he will tell the president anything that is likely to disturb him, or Cheney, or Rumsfeld. The upshot is there's likely to be simply one more bureaucratic level at which intelligence can be politicized. Now that is potentially very prophetical there, in saying that this may be a politicization of the intelligence agencies, end quote. And that was my interjection there at the end. Larry Burns. Burns is the director of the Council on Hemispheric Affairs. Quotes, affidavits and testimony by Honduran survivors have reported on his involvement in sanctioning, protecting, or covering up these death squads. Also during the time Negroponte spent at Tegucigalpa embassy, millions of dollars in bribes were paid to corrupt Honduran officials to allow room for the U.S.-backed Contras to stage attacks on the Sandinistas in neighboring Nicaragua. Negroponte has claimed that he did not recall any human rights violations ever taking place in the country during his time there. Bush had made a brilliant, if demonic appointment. Negroponte will likely get the job done, but at an insupportable cost to this and other countries, democratic institutions, as he brings his well-tested authoritarian personality to the job, end quotes. Okay, so let's scroll down. You know, we've got a lot of this negative-based or evidence-based testimony. And it is a very strange thing that David Johnston posted in the New York Times that under pressure from the White House, the Federal Bureau of Investigation has agreed to adopt the recommendations of a presidential commission, will allow the Director of National Intelligence, John D. Negroponte, to help choose a powerful intelligence chief at the FBI, Bush administration officials say. The appointment would, for the first time in the Bureau's history, give an outsider a significant role in the selection of a high-level official at the FBI, an agency long regarded by its critics as fiercely protective and of its turf and resistant to change. The intelligence chief, who will be chosen jointly by Mr. Negroponte and the director of FBI, Robert S. Mueller III, would have the tentative title of Associate Director for Intelligence and in fact be the third-ranking official at the Bureau. Okay, now I want you to park that in your brain housing group. We're talking about an FBI national security director, okay? So hang that in your head because we're going to address that very shortly. Okay, now we're going to get on down to some of the rap sheet claims. It appears that Mr. Negroponte was in all manner and all places present for the development of death squads, interrogation squads, counterinsurgency squads, not only in Honduras, but in Vietnam and in Iraq and in other places. So it definitely is the dark character of history. And we do have, it is very unique testimony that we have here from many different locations that say that Negroponte was the perfect choice if your intentions are to further that type of nefarious action. But he's obviously a poor choice if you're intending on doing something above board. And I will quote a Major General of the Iraqi's National Intelligence Service, who says here, Major General Mohammed Abdallah al-Shawani, Director of Iraq's National Intelligence Service, was quoted on January 8, 2005 Newsweek story on the Salvador option, warning that the U.S. occupation has failed to crack the problem of broad support for the insurgency. The insurgency, said, are mostly in the Sunni areas, where the population there, almost 200,000, is sympathetic to them. He said most Iraqis do not actively support the insurgents or provide them with material or logistical help, but at the same time, they won't turn them in. One military source suggested that, quote, new offensive operations, end quote, are needed that would create a fear of aiding the insurgency. Quotes, the Sunni population is paying no price for the support it is giving to the terrorists, he said. Quotes, from their point of view, it is cost-free. We have to change that equation, end quotes. Threatening everyone in a village with torture and death if the village is deemed a potential base insurgent operations can be a very effective technique. Whether the perpetrators are Nazi SS in occupied Czechoslovakia, the death squads in El Salvador, or whatever new force is invented in Iraq. The strategy of tactical terror aims to sever an insurgency from its potential base of support. At least one pre-occupation death squad is already in operation. On January 11, 2004, just days after the Pentagon plans regarding possible new offensive operations were revealed, a new militant group, Saraya Iraqna, began offering big wads of American cash for insurgent scalps, up to 50,000, the Iraqi paper Al-Ittihad reported. Our activity will not be selective, the group promised. So there you have it. There you have evidence of American money going to fund a death squad in Iraq to do away with insurgents. So, you know, you bring in the mongoose to deal with the rat. CIA Counterinsurgency Project X. During Negroponte's Honduran ambassadorship, he worked closely with Dwayne R. Claridge, a.k.a. Mr. Marone, a high-ranking CIA officer based in Honduras who was, according to a recent New York Times report, running the covert war against communism in Central America. According to Claridge, Negroponte was a big supporter of the agency's covert action mission there. At the time, the CIA utilized its Human Resource Exploitation Training Manual, well, that's a pleasant name for torture, to teach young Honduran soldiers another methodology of torture. In 1983, the manual, one in a series of recently declassified documents, addresses, among other subjects, coercive interrogation techniques utilized in torture situation, which is, according to the manual, a contact between the subject and its tormentor. The manual discusses inflicting pain or threatening pain, depriving prisoners of food and sleep, making them maintain rigid positions of long periods, stripping them naked, and keeping them blindfolded or prolonged solitary confinement. Folks, those are the objectives of MKUltra as well. Imagine that. Disseminated throughout Latin America during the early 1980s, the manual appears to have been compiled from training courses given to members or the Honduran military. The manual can be assumed to have been sanctioned by higher-ups, including Negroponte, given, for example, its statement that illegal detention always requires prior headquarters approval. The secret manual was compiled from sections earlier of the 1963 training manual entitled KUBARK, Counterintelligence Interrogation. And as a matter of reference, 1963 was the last year of MKUltra studies. This was a U.S. military intelligence field manual written as part of the Army's Foreign Intelligence Assistance Program. There is a pleasant idea. According to the manual, all coercive techniques of interrogation are designed to induce regression to a state of abject submission. The tormentor's principal coercive techniques are arrest, detention, deprivation of sensory stimuli through solitary confinement or similar methods, threats and fear, debility, pain, heightened suggestibility, hypnosis, narcosis, and induced regression. All, I might add, the outcomes of MKUltra program. A March 1992 internal report of the investigation, which was sent to then Secretary of Defense Richard Cheney. 7 such interrogation manuals used for years by the Pentagon's Southern Command throughout Latin America were said to contain objectionable and prohibited material. Army investigators traced the origins of the instructions on use of beatings, false imprisonment, executions, and truth serums back to a top-secret program run by Army Foreign Intelligence Unit in the 60s, project named Project X. Written by U.S. Army and counterinsurgency experts, started in 1965. What was 1965? That was Vietnam. And who was in Vietnam in 1965? John Negroponte. The Joint Foreign Intelligence Assistance Program used Project X to train U.S. allies in Vietnam, Iran, Latin America, and elsewhere around the world. The report to Cheney noted the offensive and objectionable material in Project X's manuals undermined U.S. credibility on course of a corrective action, namely to recall and destroy as many of the manuals as possible, shredding the embarrassing history, though some copies have survived or perhaps were meant to. So again, destroy the evidence. It is not let's do the right thing. It is destroy the evidence of us doing the wrong thing. Meanwhile, a July 1991 U.S. Southern Command confidential document records a phone conversation with Captain Victor Tice, who served in 1982 as the counterinsurgency instructor at the School of America's SOA. In it, Tice relates the history of the objectionable material in the manuals and the training courses that he assembled for use at the school. According to Tice, in 1976, following a decade of SOA tutoring, use of Project X material was suspended by Congress and other countries, and the Carter administration for fear the training would contribute to human rights violations in other countries. But the program was restored by Reagan administration in '82, shortly after Negroponte arrived in Honduras. Coincidence? Imagine that. Tice described Project X as a training package to provide counterinsurgency techniques learned in Vietnam to Latin American countries. These techniques were undoubtedly derived from Phoenix program, the CIA's assassination campaign, which liquidated 40,000 Vietnamese subversives. Who was there in Vietnam with them? John Negroponte. The course materials Tice put together, including the manuals that became the subject of the investigations, were sent to Defense Department headquarters for clearance in 1982. They came back approved and unchanged, despite the fact that Tice sought to remove, or so he said, the objectionable parts. Subsequently, hundreds of unaltered manuals, objectionable material in all, were disseminated for use throughout U.S. militarized Latin America over the next 9 years. Negroponte's role in this particular bit of objectionable history remains shrouded and shredded. Okay, so we've got an individual who's now in charge of running the indoctrination and the training of these groups throughout Central America, and now he's been made the Office of Director of National Intelligence, which puts him over top all of the intelligence agencies. So we really have what is apparently a crisis circumstance. In the last paragraph here, that George W. Bush's war on terrorism is really a global war of terror directed against the entire world becomes inescapably clear with the appointment of a man linked to this grisly history to head the entire U.S. intelligence apparatus. Perhaps there is still time to apply pressure on the Senate and halt this next step in the legitimization of torture and state terrorism if the citizenry, human rights, community, clergy, and responsible voices in the media can join in and in a single cry. Okay, so really egregious violation of our moral standing in the world by hiring a person of this objectionable history. So, what are we looking at? Intelligence Reform and Terrorism Prevention Act of 2004. Okay, Office of Director of National Intelligence. So now you've put the guy who's in charge of developing terrorism in charge of prohibiting, developing the torture programs, in charge of writing a document that limits those programs. Now that, it's like giving the keys to the hen house to the fox, right? Okay, so let's look at something that really is, I would say, is is hypothetical, is a hypothesis that I do believe has some considerable evidence that I want you to look upon and make your own decisions, okay? This is an article by Dr. David J. Kilcullen, and it regards the U.S. government counterinsurgency conference materials of 2006, roughly a year following John Negroponte's appointment as ODNI. We meet today in the shadow of continuing counterinsurgencies that have cost thousands of lives and fortune in financial, moral, and political capital. And we meet under the threat of similar insurgencies to come. Any smart future enemy will likely sidestep our unprecedented superiority in traditional force-on-force, state-on-state warfare, and so insurgency, including terrorism, will be our enemy's weapon of choice until we prove we can master it. Like Bill Murray in Groundhog Day, we're going to live this day over and over and over again until we get it right. So we seek a common doctrine to integrate national power against the threat. This has happened before, it turns out. So now, roughly a year following the ODNI coming into office, we now have them seeking a broad spectrum counterinsurgency policy. And what is it based on? It's based on the OIDP of 1966, when John Negroponte was in Vietnam. So interesting to be said. I'm not going to go down this because it does tend to bend the mind a bit. What I will show you, though, is this diagram. And I'm going to give you about 10 seconds to reflect upon this diagram without me talking, because the reality is it's really going to make some sense. Okay, immediately upon seeing this diagram, I came to the same conclusions that you did. This is the United States right now. This is the conglomerate of disparate bodies that are mixed together that are in current operations in the United States. Well, I must tell you folks that this is the format, this is the conflict ecosystem of our current counterinsurgency efforts. I need that to sink in for a moment, because the reality is the reason what this did was this answered the question that I was looking to answer, which is our current POTUS has the authority, has the executive authority, has the National Emergency Act authority, and the Homeland Security Presidential Directive authority to close this border or put military on the border that we might stop any insurgents coming across the border. However, he has not done that, and it was curious to hear POTUS state that he may do that in a year. Well, that led me to think, okay, there must be an interim reason why this border has to remain open, and folks, here is the answer. It is part of our counterinsurgency plan that you must have a porous border for the influx of foreign recruit, equipment, weapons, and ammo, funds, and sympathy and support. So we must have a porous border on the southern border in order for this, our counterinsurgency actions to take effect. And we do have a pretty good diagram of what that will look like, and that is the following. Interagency counterinsurgency framework, and it works through tempo, violence, and stability. So those are the three areas of control. And effectiveness and legitimacy, you can see all the issues there, and then the control of information, global, regional, and local. So this is an organized counterinsurgency effort within the United States against an insurgency, and I'll allow you to paint those in your own head as to who's the insurgent and who's the counterinsurgent. But I might add that General Petraeus, who was fired by Obama, was a counterinsurgency specialist. And General Flynn, who was fired by Obama, is a counterinsurgency specialist. And Mike Rogers, Admiral Mike Rogers. These gentlemen are the foremost experts in this area throughout the world, and they were in senior positions in our country. And if you are taking these people off the board, i.e. Petraeus and Flynn, it really lends me some credibility in the following hypothesis. And this is going to sound outrageous until we look for the evidence, folks, and we do have a mounting wall of evidence coming at us, that these death groups, these insurgencies, these trained groups, which are trained, many of them at Harvard, many of them within U.S. programs by the U.S. military or CIA or MI6 globally, were developed for the specific purpose of infiltrating the United States through our southern border and taking us down as a country. And I give you our first example of that is MS-13. And MS-13 was El Salvadorian, and they are especially wicked, and they were trained by us. What does that tell us? That these are insurgency groups that were meant to be brought in through our porous border, and now they're being dealt with through a counterinsurgency operation mounted by our POTUS, by our military, and by our faithful intelligence operations. So it all points towards intelligence. Well, you know, look, we've taken a look at John Negroponte, but let's take a look at his background. I'm going to stop the share for a moment. And let's just take a look at his background, because very interesting that they chose this individual, but when you begin to see his background, it all starts to kind of make sense. Okay, let me see if I can load this one here for you. Waiting for that to load. Now, I'm going to share this with you very quickly, and this is John Negroponte's curriculum vitae there. Let's see, it's just a PDF on him, so hang on here. Okay, born London, England. Born in London, England. Moved to United States that year, New York City. Graduate of Yale, graduate of Georgetown's Foreign Service Program. Let's see, let's go down here. He was in Hong Kong as a visa commercial officer, Bureau of American Affairs. Let me put this aside, sometimes these things get in the way. Okay. Bureau of African Affairs, Washington, D.C. Vietnamese language training. He spoke Vietnamese. Saigon, Vietnam in 1964 through 68. Paris, France as liaison officer, 68 through 69. He was there for the Paris Peace Talks on Vietnam. Stanford University, Hoover Institution, State Department Fellow, 69-70. National Security Council staff, 70 through 73. That means he's advising the president in that point. Quito, Ecuador, political counselor, 73 through 75. Thessalonica, Greece, 75 to 77. Bureau of Oceans, International, Environmental, and Scientific Affairs, 77 through 79. East Asia Pacific Bureau, Deputy Assistant Secretary, 80-81. Honduras Ambassador, 81 through 85. Bureau of Oceans, global warming much? What do you think? National Security Council, again, 87 through 89. Mexico Ambassador, 89 through 93. So Mexico, so now he has Mexico. He was Ambassador to Mexico for 4 years. Philippines Ambassador. Worked for McGraw-Hill Companies. Permanent Representative of the United Nations. Ambassador to Iraq, 2004-2005, Director of National Intelligence, 2005-2007, Deputy Director of State, 2007 to 2009, and now retired after that in 2009 for a think tank, McClarty Associates. And, I might add, a Rhodes Scholar, which is not listed on here. Now, folks, when we start looking at our previous shows and we start looking at the bullet points involved here with Mr. Negroponte, he is the classic representative of the global deep state to bring about their orchestrated efforts at one world government. And I give you, John Negroponte, the perfect advocate for that evidence, to create a insurgency within our own United States and throughout the globe to bring about that end. Whoa, that is some frightening material there, folks, but there it is right in front of you. Let's look at what Southfront has to say about big tech companies these days. No thanks. Let me drag this over here. Okay, big profits driving online censorship. This summer, we have witnessed the increasing demand by mainstream media, Democratic Party legislators, and even former disgraced intelligence agency heads for the silencing of dissenting viewpoints. Although the most recent wholesale ban on Alex Jones and InfoWars on just about every social media platform out there is the most glaring and chilling example of outright censorship, the efforts of the deep state to silence any voices of dissent or for presenting a narrative counter to that being peddled by the almost complete monopoly of social and mainstream media that serves them has been building in intensity for quite some time. The claims that the big tech companies that control all social media platforms through virtual monopoly are not required to meet the constitutional protections of the First Amendment because they are not governmental agencies but private businesses is patently false. Immediately following the blanket ban on Alex Jones-related accounts on social media platforms, a multitude of mass media writers and pundits appeared to argue why such a move was both vital and wholly legal. Perhaps a more reasonable opinion in this regard was presented in the Washington Examiner, an opinion piece by Aaron Dunn, published on August 6th. The author makes two basic assertions. Firstly, she argues correctly that there is no hate speech, except in the First Amendment's protection of speech. Secondly, she argues that private companies' powers to regulate what speech is acceptable are not governed by the First Amendment. She succinctly states, quote, private companies, unlike the government, are not beholden to the court's decision for free speech. Facebook, Apple, YouTube can all decide for themselves how to define hate speech and enforce that definition. That makes sense. As private companies catering to users, they have an obligation to shareholders to make a profit, so they will pick a definition of hate speech that their users want and then enforce that. For those who don't like chosen definition, there is also a simple solution. Don't use those sites. This is how the market works. If you don't like the terms of service, then there are other options, or soon will be. Companies want your business. Unlike subscribing to the laws of the United States, the user agreements of social media companies are optional. Okay, folks, this is evidence. This is evidence to the fact that I've been sharing in many of my previous shows, and I'm going to point blank say it. This has been their long-term plan, which is through MK Ultra. The hidden parts of MK Ultra were the financing objectives, and the financing objectives were with regard to how to permissibly and effectively utilize U.S. taxpayer dollars in a black market fashion or an illicit fashion to outsource those issues which either were black operations, were objectionable operations, or which would allow them to create hybrid organizations such as currently exist that were beyond the oversight of we the people, beyond the oversight of Congress. And then when you had a complicit Congress involved, it presented a further layer of sidestepping of we the people's rights. And then you add the continued resolution over the last 200 years to earn companies human rights, which I had on an author on my previous programs, Adam Winkler. He did a wonderful book of We the Corporations that demonstrates the over 200-year effort to give the corporations human rights. And I will give you that this ODNI, the reason why it was held in check for 50 for some 46 years before appointing an ODNI is because they were waiting for the appropriate moment in the future of American population, the future of social engineering that they had been implying for the last 46 years. They were waiting for that exact moment when the U.S. population was either asleep, unaware, or unfortunately uneducated enough to understand the implications of their institution and their planning. And I give you the submission of that last article, but I also will make it very clear their objectives were truly nefarious. And I will show you that through this article that I'm bringing up currently. In that, remember that one of the reasons why John Negroponte was appointed was in order to assist the FBI director, then Robert S. Mueller III, in appointing a director of FBI national security for counterintelligence or counterinsurgency efforts within the United States, within the FBI. Well, let me read you. The National Security Branch is a service within the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The NSB is responsible for protecting the United States from weapons of mass destruction, acts of terrorism, foreign intelligence operations, and espionage. Now, let me make sure that this is being shared here so that you can see what I'm seeing. And that is, if this was the reason that Negroponte, the major reason that Negroponte was appointed, it was that to bring all of the intelligence services together for the purpose of counterintelligence and counterinsurgency within the United States, why then was this person never appointed? Now, by never appointed, I mean it was not appointed by these people, which was the objective. The website was designed, the segment of the FBI was, quote, created, but really has been a false front until, and you're going to be surprised by this, the director of the FBI NSB was appointed by Donald J. Trump in September of 2018. 13 years later, folks. So, if their objective was to bring together better intelligence instead of politicizing the FBI, they would have appointed this individual to that position. They would have utilized that skill, that honing, that cooperative nature of why an ODNI was put in charge in the first place. That was the whole objective of placing an ODNI in that position, of creating that position, was to coalesce the groups of intelligence agencies. And I give you the current format that they used in MK Ultra as well. In the 70s, they had the Church investigation, they had the MK Ultra panel's investigation, and they said that the purpose was to create a coalescence of intelligence to prepare for external assaults coming into the United States. And then within 5 years, and I've demonstrated that on my website, on my YouTube site, there's a movie that I did on there which demonstrates that if that was their purpose, they failed miserably, because it wasn't their purpose. Their true purpose has always been to make it look like they're doing the right thing, to do the dog and pony show, to invent the new program, to designate the new program, and then actually never do anything because we're not paying attention. They show us the P and then they throw the P underneath the table. It's the shell game, folks. That's what they've been playing. And that's what they, again, did with the FBI National Security Bureau, or whatever you're going to call it here. And that's their continued efforts, is to put these people in place, not to quote, do what we thought they were supposed to do, but to do what their objective is in doing. And their objective is exactly what this article portrays, which is that, and which I brought forward very clearly in my previous shows is that they've created these government-funded, government-developed, hybrid, quasi-governmental corporations that have human rights and don't have the oversight or the controls that are associated with governmental organizations, but can be awarded contracts. And in the instance of just using Amazon Web Services as a good example, Amazon Web Services has security clearance above SAP and now runs the cooperative private-public cloud for all 17 of the intelligence agencies. And who put that in place? Who offered up that solicitation for contract? Who awarded that contract? None other than James R. Clapper, retired Lieutenant General, former employee of SRA, who has now been bought up by General Dynamics. Folks, this was their intention. Their intention was to continually develop these hybrid quasi-governmental corporations that are without the external to the oversight of we the people, who have human rights now, so they actually can sue us, and who are beholden to no one but the global organizations that perpetrated them and that planned them. And let's be very clear, my previous shows have demonstrated that this follows the format, the framework, the disciplinary framework that was perfected not only by the Empire of Rome, but further made a global asset in the British Empire of the 1600s. I give you the East India Company, the Virginia Company, the Massachusetts Bay Company, the Hudson Bay Company. These companies were those hybrid quasi-governmental operations that were allowed to violate the laws of the land because they were conquering and bringing back materials to the ruling class, and it gave them 6 degrees of separation from the governments that they were feeding money back to, and allowed them the legality of, let's say, taking slaves or selling drugs. They were allowed to do whatever they had to do to fulfill the quest of empire. And that's what we're facing, folks, is we're facing the Facebooks, the Twitters, the Amazon Web Services, the Googles that were paid for and were sponsored, and in fact the educations, which is consistent with the Rhodes-Milner Roundtable and the Chatham House, that people's educations were paid for, i.e. BHO having his education paid for by Saudi Arabian prince. All these people's educations were paid for, as in those who are running Google right now, where their scholarships were paid for, their research mandate was paid for by DARPA and National Science Foundation. And they claim that they took no government monies. Well, that is an absolute falsehood. And they were given that money in order to develop these assets which collect our intelligence. So I give you, this has been their long-term plan, folks, that was begun in 1955, and perhaps even earlier, but it was made public in 1955 that their intention was to have an officer of Director of National Intelligence that would bring all of these hats together under the same umbrella. And that is what we're currently facing in this world, folks, is that the intelligence apparatus has gone kaflooey, it's gone haywire, it's gone rogue. It is determined that it's going to do whatever it wants to do because it answers to nobody. It doesn't answer to we the people. Look at Brexit. The people voted on a referendum to leave the EU, but now they're being told that they can't leave the EU. Well, who rules there? Certainly not the people. Certainly not. And I give you the intelligence agency. This is from Wikispooks. The justification for a national intelligence agency has somewhat circular logic to it in the climate of fear and suspicion generated by the Cold War and the secrecy surrounding terrifying new weapons. I'll give you they sponsored the creation of these hybrid organizations, this Hydra, this rogue agency. They created it through public and societal or social engineering. Now, the objectives of MK Ultra project was to perfect the methods of social engineering. The objective of the Ultra project, which was just prior to that, which is a British project, was to master the conglomeration of intelligence. So they've been planning this since the 40s and 50s, folks, and we need to recognize that this is a well thought out, well orchestrated plan, that they waited for the exact moment when the tide would be sufficient to float the very heavy boat that they are putting into harbor. The 21st century war on terror is, however, failing to galvanize people in quite the same way. Whilst intelligence agencies have a long history of carrying out false flag attacks, awareness of this fact in the 20th century was limited. The widespread understanding of 9/11 as a plan devised by deep state insiders has perpetrated increasing questions to be asked about intelligence agencies. Many people are now asking what justification there can be for organizations that claim the right to break laws and carry out murder, torture, and mass surveillance amidst an ends justifies the means culture. In practice, many, perhaps most, intelligence agencies lacked effective oversight, leading to concerns about their unaccountability and the seemingly ever-increasing secrecy surrounding their operations. Well, I'll give you Alex Jones. Alex Jones is a known participant with Stratfor, which has some connections to the Israeli Mossad or Israeli military. And so why would they be governed? Well, they'd be governed because they are a competitive interest in intelligence gathering. And so they have to be governed. The culture of secrecy, the large, often undisclosed budgets of intelligence agencies, together with their freedom to operate outside the restrictions of national laws, makes them ideal for carrying out deep events such as assassinations or false flag terror attacks. This has made them a core component of deep states, which probably no more than a token loyalty of national interest. So now there's the truth, folks. There is the truth, that because intelligence agencies have secret budgets that they don't have to disclose to we the people, they only discuss to intelligence boards in the Senate or in the House, and we know how they've been infiltrated. I mean, need I say more? Adam Schiff? Need I say more? John McCain? You know, when your intelligence organizations or your oversight operations are overseen by the people that are involved in these operations, again, we've got the fox having the keys to the hen house. The intelligence information gathering nowadays is large part by mass surveillance is one part of the activities of intelligence agencies. Another major part is covert operations, including assassination, drug trafficking, most notably by the CIA associated with money laundering, cyber terrorism, probably most notably by the NSA and the Mossad, and a spectrum of clandestine regime change efforts. Okay, we're going to just briefly look through these intelligence groups. And this is a wonderful display because it includes these deep state organizations like Booz Allen Hamilton, who are hybrid organizations given contracts to perform what our government is supposed to be performing for us, but they have outsourced it to a company that is allowed to do what they can't do. CIA, Cyber Threat Intelligence, DGSE in France, Defense Intelligence Agency, Diligence. Now, Mike Baker is the head of Diligence, and he is a contributor, at least to my knowledge. He has been on Fox News for some time. Direction de la Surveillance du Territoire, France, Dutch, GCHQ. Now, GCHQ is the British MI5, the British FBI version, the NSA of their FBI, right? Hackloy. Interesting, huh? Hackloy. Inter-Services Intelligence of Pakistan. We heard Pakistan involved in this whole effort in our politics here recently. Joint Terrorism Analysis Center, MI5. Joint Threat Research Intelligence Group, GCHQ. KGB of Russia. Lechem, Israel Defense Ministry. MI5, Security Service, MI5. MI5A branch, B branch, C branch, D branch, E branch, F branch, G branch, H branch, K branch, T branch. MI6, Military Intelligence Directorate Israel. Mossad, Muslim Contact Unit. National Extremes Tactical Coordination Unit. Naval Intelligence Division. New Zealand Security Intelligence Service. Office of National Intelligence, U.S. Navy. Office of Policy Coordination, Office of Strategic Services. Office of the Director of National Intelligence, ODNI. Office of National Counterintelligence Executive. Imagine that. I'm going to stop for the share for a second. I'm going to look over here for an article that I want to post up here. Okay, I'm going to show you this one. And we'll remember this. This was the organization that was developed in 2005 but never manned. So I give you the face of our national security branch of the FBI. So they went as far as even to do a brochure of an organization that just doesn't even have a head to it. Now, how false flag is that, folks? They even assign different areas of intelligence collection. Let me share this with you. Okay, these are the different areas of NSB components who doesn't even have a director until 2018 September. This was their brochure. I gotta say, rather professionally, perpetrated hoax, wouldn't you say? So, what are we left with? Well, we're left with the fact that we just don't know what we don't know, and so we need to some extent, we need to seek out the materials, but additionally, we need to become educated on what's going on out there. What is happening? What are we looking at? Well, we're looking at if they currently want to dumb us down or keep us in the dark, what they're going to do is they're going to repeatedly do things like cook the intelligence. They're going to give us, provocation of WMDs. Well, guess who was working in for Colin Powell when the idea of the WMDs came up? You got it, John Negroponte. So this is again, we're faced with the reality of what happens is we get cooked. Intelligence occurs when actual factual information is transformed or made sexier or embellished to enhance its significance or lend it to more credibility. Cooked means a mixture of genuine fake material provided via a double agent to one's adversary. Now, frankly, that is Satan's MO. Is that he takes God's word and he twists it just a bit. You most certainly will not die if you eat of that apple. You will become like God. So he takes the truth and he twists the truth, and that's the same exact thing that we're seeing here, which lends credibility to the fact that we know who's behind these efforts. Okay? Greg Thielman, who served as top intelligence official at the U.S. State Department until resigning shortly before the war in Iraq, is one of several analysts who have charged the Bush administration with cooking its intelligence. An opinion piece in the New York Times reported May 30th, 2003 on the intelligence community's response to George W. Bush administration's handling of the failure to find weapons of mass destruction, describes it as an intelligence failure is caused outrage among the intelligence professions, so widespread that they have formed a group, Veteran Intelligence Professionals for Sanity. On February 7, 2003, Common Dreams published a copy of the letter the group wrote to President Bush to protest what it called a policy and intelligence fiasco of monumental proportions. Now, I've got to say, folks, I need folks to understand what is just being said in this paragraph that is far beyond the words that are just being portrayed. Let us talk about those people out there who are claiming that Freemasonry is something good, that these are good and righteous and prudent and humane and people who mean for the good of all mankind. I give you the VIPs, the folks who are within the intelligence agency who have noble intents, but who have been infiltrated to the point where their executive leaders are following a completely opposite doctrine than their own. And they were in there working for these people, performing these acts in order to further a narrative, an objective that was not their own, that they hadn't even sworn to. Yet they were performing those functions. I'll give you guys like Bill Binney, who were complicit in intentions beyond their own considerations. And I give it to you here once again, that George W. Bush apparently was the member of an infiltration organization that had the intention of putting out documents like the Patriot Act and had intentions of furthering the ODNI so that they could bring in insurgency groups into the United States and so that they could further the methods of intelligence gathering by these quasi-governmental operations that they funded 20 or 30 years ago. And for those references, you can go back to my previous shows and you will see that I've brought all the documentation that proves that they created Google, they created Facebook, they created these organizations through either CIA and NSF, DARPA, or other funding mechanisms to keep them underneath the table. And that's what we're seeing is that, look, folks, you can be as noble as apple pie. You can be as humble and as righteous as you want to be. But if you're serving an evil organization that is headed and has been duped into believing that they're following a certain objective when in fact they're following Satan's objectives or the evil objectives of wicked men and women, then are you not complicit in the outcomes of those objectives? So be very careful who you're serving. The Bush administration based a crucial pre-war assertion about ties between Iraq and al-Qaeda on detailed statements made by captive Ibn al-Sheikh al-Libi, provided his most specific and elaborate accounts about ties between Iraq and al-Qaeda only after he secretly handed over to Egypt by the United States in January 2002 as a process known as rendition. Douglas Gell reported on December 9, 2005, New York Times, al-Libi later said he had fabricated them to escape harsh treatment, according to the current and former government officials. How do we know what's true? We don't know what's true. We'll never know what's true. How is there any kind of people's oversight over this? There isn't any. How do we know that they didn't create Al-Qaeda as an insurgent organization to attack the United States? We don't know that. How do we know that they didn't create ISIS as an insurgency operation that would eventually attack the United States through coming across as a migrant organization? We don't know that. You see what I'm saying? That without insight, they have created a hydra that we cannot determine the truth from a lie, because it's been cooked intelligence. They've created a circumstance where they can basically tell us what they want to tell us, and we basically have to believe it. I'm going to stop the share for a second. Let's open up another application here. Okay. Bear with me for a second. Okay. Trying to get an application up, and bear with me. I'm just going to get over to it. Okay, in previous shows, we have looked into this format that I've been creating within software called the Personal Brain. Now I'm using an older version of this, but you can open this in HTML, or you can utilize the Brain software if you do want to look further into it. But what I've done is I've begun. This software is very useful when you start to do very in-depth studies that take you down rabbit holes, because it allows you to present basically a mind map for you to go down through these rabbit holes and click the disparate information to give you that capacity to look further into the rabbit hole. Well, look, folks, it looks like I'm coming up on the time frame of the recording going to be finalized at the 2-hour period here. So I'm going to go ahead and stop this meeting here in just offer a basic prayer, and then end this, and I will be back with you shortly. This is a very useful mechanism, and I assure you I want to record this so that you can utilize this material in your own research. Precious Heavenly Father, we come before you today just honored and thankful for your intervention in this United States. Lord, thank you for sending us this POTUS. Thank you for waking the military up to their responsibilities as patriots. And Lord, we thank you for intervening in this country that you gave us. We are blessed to have a nation that lives free, Lord, and we hope and pray to turn our hearts back to you and have that nation continued in your blessings throughout history, Lord. We thank you for the opportunity to live free and for the opportunity to love one another and to care about one another beyond our own considerations, Lord, for that's what makes this country so great, is that we have a heart for each other. Father, uncover all these wily diversions of the enemy. Show us the truth. Give us information that we might be aware, we might be educated, and Lord, we look to you for wisdom. And your word says that you will give it to those who ask. You will give it liberally. So we ask for wisdom now, Lord. We thank you for this wonderful day. We thank you for this opportunity to join together, and we praise you for again intervening in this country. I ask all these prayers in your precious name, Lord Jesus. Amen. Thank you, folks, for coming today, and I look forward to sharing with you further. And I thank you for your time, and I'll bring out further editions of this information shortly.